Hello, my friends, and welcome to a special live stream edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads, specifically focusing on chaos in Kabul. I am self-producing tonight as well. Hopefully it'll all go pretty darn smoothly, but we shall see. Tonight we have a series of special guests, starting with Sergeant First Class retired Lindsay Maringer, who served for about a decade in U.S. Special Forces and included a couple of tours of duty in Afghanistan. He is currently working to help extract Afghans from that country that is now being left asunder by the United States of America. We're going to talk with Sergeant First Class Meringer, and then we'll be joined by Keith Nobles, who for the last decade of the Cold War was a contractor to the military intelligence community. We're going to get his insights, and then I'm going to share my interview, a very important one I did last week, with the former U.S. ambassador to Bahrain from 1986 to 1989, Sam Zakhem. That and so much more are coming up today here on a special report edition, live streaming Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, and we're getting started right now.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends. Good evening and welcome to a special report edition, a live stream of Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, and it is a pleasure and a privilege to be with you this evening, although, of course, it is a very somber day as the United States of America is withdrawing from Afghanistan and leaving chaos in its wake. Earlier today, there was a terrorist attack outside Karzai International Airport, where at the Abbey Gate, 13, we know as of now it's 13 American servicemen died. Many others, including Americans, injured in that dual attack. One, I believe, was a car bomb, followed by a suicide bomber. This is the kind of chaos that is ensuing as Americans are stuck behind terrorist lines, behind enemy lines, as are our allies in Europe and our partners in Afghanistan. The many Afghans who have done so much to help make their country a stable place for a while, at least, relatively speaking, and also to help our country to pursue our mission. Tonight, we have a series of guests, as I indicated at the top, and I'm very pleased to welcome one of them. From 2012 to 2021, Sergeant First Class Lindsey Meringer served our country in the 10th Group Airborne of the U.S. Special Forces and included two tours, I believe, in 2016 and 2017 in Afghanistan, and is now working very closely with our partners over there to help try and get Afghan allies out. Sergeant First Class Meringer, welcome to the show. It's so good to talk to you again.
Thanks, Jimmy. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you have a busy schedule, and it really means a lot. Sir, let me just ask you a very broad question to the best of your ability, because there's so much going on and so much to keep tabs on. What is the current lay of the land in Afghanistan from your understanding and the intel you know?
Well, I suppose chaos would probably be the appropriate word. We really shut down most of the things that we were doing. For those of you who didn't really listen to the first time that Jimmy and I spoke, we've kind of built an infrastructure of being able to communicate with our interpreters and our NMRG and just families and things like that, and start to shepherd them around Kabul, trying to get them into the airport, ground contacts at the airport to try to get people in. Had a ton of successes over the past couple of days. It's with all the negative that we're seeing and all the ways that, kind of the government has messed up across all of the administrations through this, seeing the people that have come together to try to fix this. A lot of retired people, a lot of active people, and there's just a ton of groups that I'm in. As you see, I am kind of monitoring stuff as we're talking. But yeah, we pushed hard into last night and this morning, and then obviously the events of this morning have kind of put a quash on most things. They're still prioritizing AMSITs, trying to get them out, but we pushed most of our people into hiding. And then we'll figure out, we're kind of regrouping and figuring out what alternate plans are and laying that out, And the side plans I'm not really going to get into, just as we're trying to dev that out and kind of OPSEC. Sure. But yeah, that's kind of where there's a lot of taking a knee right now and kind of getting a feel for what's going on.
When we look at the situation in Afghanistan, I mean, President Biden just spoke within the last hour and a half or so. And look, I mean, he's giving all of these promises about being able to get Americans out. He still wants to hold to that hard and true to that August 31st deadline that he artificially planted upon American servicemen and women to get our people, our American citizens, as well as our allies and our partners and our friends who are Afghans, who are Europeans, etc., out of the country. He's still holding to that August 31st deadline. He was making all sorts of promises. It's hard to imagine at this point, especially given the lay of the land, sir, that we're going to be able to keep all those promises in the next 5 days or so. What do you make of that August 31st deadline and the daunting task up ahead, especially as you and others that you're working with are trying, independent oftentimes of the U.S. government and forces there, to extract Afghans from the country?
I mean, frankly, it seems impossible. It's insane to me that it really seems like we are going to leave people there. And I say we as in the government. We found the most success that we've had over the past couple of days is just avoiding all government channels and really just using our own networks and our own relationships, using, it shows their value, but a lot of the interpreters and kind of NMRG people and the relationships that we have with them and our trust in them, and being able to communicate directly with them, have them escort, send additional people that may not have shepherds to them, to our trusted people, have them navigate and follow our instructions because they're so good at it by now, and really just kind of use our own internal networks. It's truly been amazing what I've been able to see. We have the Deo Presso Liber is a special forces kind of creed and motto is to free the oppressed. I had another buddy of mine that messaged and he said, a lot of people say Deo Presso Liber and being kind of empty. But he's like, this is the most Deo Presso Liber that I've ever done in my special forces career, which is kind of cool to see. But yeah, I don't see, especially in the past 2 days, we were having more success of getting people to the airfield, and then the Taliban just really started to clamp down. They started to be more brazen. They were just beating people as they try to get to the airport. So we were then really having to try to navigate back roads, back routes, farm fields, things like that to get people around. Taliban checkpoints moved in closer to the airport. They became just stricter and stricter as to who they let in. I saw a report earlier. I haven't really been watching the news, frankly. I don't see it as being beneficial while we're in the middle of all of it. But I did see a report that the State Department passed all of the names of people we need to get out to the Taliban, trying to get them access through the checkpoints, which is just insanity to
right.
me.
Politico reported that, I believe, and
yeah.
It is stunning to think that you would give them. It's like giving them a blacklist.
It's a kill list. It's literally a kill list. It's fascinating. That if that's true, that I try to stay optimistic at most times, but that's going to break me a little bit in terms of the faith that I have in our government.
What do you think would compel the American government or any officials on the ground there to say, we're going to give you this list so that you can allow us to shepherd our people through and help them shepherd through, especially the Afghans?
I honestly, I have no idea what that thought process. The only thing I could think of is in a positive nature is that they truly believed that we had an agreement with the Taliban, and that they were going to hold their end of the bargain, and that they would just be like, okay, yes, this is a list of people that we're going to let the Americans have back. And yeah, it's crazy to me. And especially after, and it would be conjecture to say if it ties to one, one ties to the other, but the amount of times that we heard from our people that their families, Taliban were going right to their door and telling them flat out, we have your address now. We know you worked with the Americans. Because honestly, that list aside, once the Taliban took the government, they had access to all those records. And we can't know how the Afghan government kept their records or what kind of security was involved in that. So they could have very well had access to all those names and addresses as it was. But still, the fact that they sent that list out is pretty horrifying.
Again, we're talking with Sergeant First Class retired Lindsay Maringer, who just earlier this year left the service of the U.S. military in the 10th Group U.S. Special Forces Airborne. And I so appreciate your service. Thank you for what you have done for our country and what you are continuing to do for our country and those who helped our nation over the course of the last 20 years. This is nearly a 20-year war. Come October 7th, we will hit that anniversary. And President Biden was eager to get the United States out of Afghanistan by September 11th and the 20th anniversary of the horrible terrorist attack on our country that got all of this started. And I'm curious, as everybody's wondering, how in the world could we have gotten to this point? How could we not have planned for this? Clearly, the American people resoundingly support withdrawing, but not like this, Sergeant First Class Meringer.
Yeah. Again, as we talked about last time, it was never going to be perfectly clean. And anyone who thinks that is extremely naive. I've seen visas that have come across, from 2019 that haven't been processed. So there is a huge fault through the Trump administration as well. It's very frustrating, the political opportunism that we're seeing, especially as a lot of us are giving up most of our days to navigating this as just on a personal level, and both administrations are completely to blame. It's really disgusting. But as I mentioned last time too, is I tie this down to the generals, and down to the lower levels. A president sets an end state, but it's then tasked down for the mechanisms that get that done. You put General Meringer, if that would ever be a thing, I probably would have held Bagram as an outpost more than anything, just for its size, ability for aircraft, probably ability to be secured, and then really focused as soon as Trump made that deal. Hey, we need to get our priority people out. If we have a backlog of visas that are from 2018, 2019, get those people processed immediately, or at least make a deal with Qatar, make a deal with somebody to get them to that spot, and then so we can start to funnel out. The amount of people that we're trying to do last minute that are such high value people is crazy to me. So I think in just kind of the phased approach that in terms of priorities, and it's tough to say priorities because I don't want to say that anyone is really less important than another, but I speak from a personal nature in that there's a lot of people there that did a lot for us. And I would selfishly take them over a general Afghan citizen who's just trying to flee. Sometimes you do have to prioritize people.
Well, and when we look, though, at the country right now and the current state of affairs, you mentioned Bagram. How we abandoned that air base is beyond me. And yet, I believe it was President Biden who specifically says that said today that his advisors urged him, said there's no real purpose in holding on to Bagram, so we should just let it go and focus on Hamid Karzai International Airport. And what you're saying is, look, we shouldn't have abandoned Bagram. I heard other analysts and military experts say exactly that. And I'm struck by the tactical errors that seem to be been made by the military top brass over the past couple of years, especially in the past few months.
Yeah, and I think you bring up, exactly what you said. That is kind of my point. Everyone's throwing this at the top, but Biden doesn't know military strategy. Even as long as he's been in office, that's not his wheelhouse. It never has been. It never will be. And the expectation that that is a thing shouldn't be there. Any advisor that told them that this consolidating down to this airfield, I think, was a gross, a gross misplanning. But again, it's easy for us to armchair quarterback this and kind of do hindsight. None of us are in the position to make that decision. And also people at that level also see intelligence that even people in my job don't see. There are levels of classification that go way above, I have a TS, but, there's things that I wouldn't even know. So I try not to armchair it too bad. And most of the people in the groups that I'm in, they complain because we're frustrated, but we're just doing the best we can now, trying to save anyone and everyone that we can.
Now, in terms of the, look, obviously, as you noted, we had things that were done in all the previous administration, going back to Bush and how he decided, let's go and embark on a nation-building mission in Afghanistan. And then you had President Trump strike that deal with the Taliban, charting May 1st as the withdrawal date. Now, of course, President Biden didn't have to hold true to that. He extended it out to August 31st. But it seems to me that an artificial deadline like this puts the American people and our allies in a very precarious position, especially when you're making such last-minute decisions. In the end, to what extent do you think President Biden deserves any sort of responsibility as the current president who did make that decision to withdraw from Afghanistan and to do so in such a hasty timeline? Or to what extent do you think maybe he wasn't being given the full or accurate information of what was happening on the ground? Because clearly, despite reports that intelligence was saying, look, we could see Kabul taken in a matter of days, they didn't heed those sorts of warnings, and it happened really quick.
Yeah, I think that I tried to give him more the benefit of the doubt. Again, I'm not a Trump or Biden supporter,
Sure.
frankly. But initially, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. But you take like Dan Crenshaw, he's someone I've actually been very frustrated with lately because he seems to be really doing political opportunism in his social media. But he came out with a thing the other day that he's like, all things aside, this is America and these are Americans. We don't leave people behind. The answer is not to keep, agreeing to what the Taliban's saying. It's like, if they say, you have a 31st deadline and we still have people there, then we tell them to go F themselves and we do whatever is necessary to go in there. You have thousands of operators retired, put us, ties to contract companies. We're begging to go over. Any Green Beret that's active is going to go over. You could have thousands of Green Berets secure that airfield, and any of us would put our life on the line to get not even AMSITs out of there, but any of the NMRG that helped us, our TERPs that helped us. We consider those people family, and we would happily go secure that city. People would be lost, obviously, especially as ISIS has moved back in. But just saying, we're going to hold your deadline and just leave the rest of these people behind, I think is disgusting. When you have so many people that are chomping at the bit just to go. Obviously, we don't want to be there anymore. We don't flood Afghanistan again. But if we need to secure that city to get our people out, then that's what we do. And I was asked last night, kind of just thoughts on it. And I haven't been able to emotionally wrap my head around it that we are intending to leave people behind at the government level. And frankly, even talking to you now, it still just seems so impossible to me that is an option that I don't know. I don't really know what I'm going to do with it. Myself and the rest of the people. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and to be clear, sir, President Biden did say we'll get as many people as we can out. As many as we can? I've never heard of that for the American people, let alone, of course, our Afghan allies. But when we're talking about American citizens, including, I saw reports from a couple of days ago that there were like high school students who were there because they were visiting family that was in Afghanistan, and then this all suddenly happens and they're unable to get out of the country, and they are American citizens. I mean, it's unfathomable to think about that. And then to think that, what do you make of the fact that the United States is relying on the Taliban to provide perimeter security, and then they get to an American checkpoint before they can get into the airport, which is exactly what caused the problem today when we had the suicide bombing that clearly got through the Taliban checkpoint in order to get to the American checkpoint, and then we lose American lives and many Afghan lives as well.
Well, I think something you said there is kind of incorrect.
Okay.
It's not that we were relying on the Taliban for perimeter security. We, from what I understand, the deal that was broached is that that wasn't something we asked for. That was something that they were doing,
Hmm.
and it wasn't security for us. They formed a ring to stop people from getting to us. You know, they they're the Taliban. Who are they protecting us from? ISIS? To think that they were a security ring, and we were depending and we were relying on that is not a thing. They, from everyone that we were moving on the ground that had the appropriate paperwork, Taliban was still just beating them and turning them away. They were doing better with true, if you had an American passport. I didn't hear many stories of violence against that, but approved SIVs, everything, you fully turned away or beaten. Yeah,
Well,
it was a nightmare.
it's striking that you say that, because from all the media reports, from even listening to the way that General McKenzie, the Central Command commander, the way that he was talking in a press conference earlier today, even saying that the Taliban's thwarted some attacks, they've given them info to address terrorist attacks, and that with the way that he was talking about and the media was talking about, it seemed like they were basically saying, okay, the Taliban are providing this layer of security first, and then it gets to us, and we can do those secondary checks. Like, that's a lot of the media reporting.
Sure, and that may be, again, there I don't want to misspeak because
Sure.
I am conjecturing some, because sure, at
Fair
an
enough, sir.
administrative level that could have been an intent, and at some governmental level, I mean, we've worked this whole deal with the Taliban, so I'm sure in there was somewhere was like, hey, you guys pull security for us. But the only view that I can have, which makes that just truly more ridiculous than it even sounds, because it sounds pretty ridiculous,
Yes.
is just the on the ground feedback of people that I have direct comms with, as I'm, messaging directly with a guy that just got beat trying to get through through a Taliban checkpoint.
Right.
So the difference between the intent and the end state is what I'm speaking to. But even just in my experience, is if we worked that deal, and I know the soldiers on there would not, they would not rely on that security at all. They would have complete, defense posture. And even at the command level, that would have been a deal that would have been made just as an appeasement metric, as opposed to believing that that was truly a defense metric.
Again, we're talking with Sergeant First Class Lindsay Meringer, retired. He was with the U.S. Special Forces 10th Group Airborne from 2012 through 2021 into this year, including 2 tours in Afghanistan. I want to get back to what's happening in terms of the Afghans trying to make their way to leaving the country, to getting to Kabul's airport. But first, there's a lot of talk about the terrorist attacks that we saw today being from ISIS-K, and that, the Taliban are against ISIS-K, that they're not aligned, and so it can't be like that the Taliban maybe helped allow anybody from ISIS-K through, that it's, you hear different stories where on the one hand it's that they are opposed because ISIS-K has their interests, for example, Al-Qaeda has theirs, and they want power grabs in the country now that there's a big vacuum. They want to take advantage of that, and so the Taliban wouldn't be aligned with them. But then you have those who say, well, wait a second, we've been at war with the Taliban. They've worked with Al-Qaeda in the past. We shouldn't trust them in these ways. What do you make of the idea in terms of ISIS-K being alleged to have done this attack, and they've claimed responsibility for it? And our trust relationship with the Taliban, because even though President Biden says, I don't trust the Taliban, it seems like they're trusting the Taliban with the kind of information that they're giving them at the very least.
Yeah, that trust factor of the Taliban is kind of a funny combination of words.
Yeah.
So I think you have to look at it kind of in a nationalistic level and then down to a village level. Afghanistan as a whole, it's a tribal community. It's just because stuff gets pushed out in Kabul, it doesn't mean anything out in the valleys. And so as we would see, we'd go in and we would either be going against the Taliban, valley, or an ISIS-K valley, and you'd get plenty of intelligence that one fighter was with one and then the other, and then back and forth as we'd kind of build out packets on them. It's really who's in control of the valley, and they either want to die or they don't. We'd have ISIS come in and basically kill everyone that wouldn't join them. And then if we, so former Taliban, they're saying, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and be ISIS for a while. And then we clear out ISIS, or ISIS leaves and they go back to being Taliban. It's such a fluid structure. To say that one is truly one or the other, I think would be wrong. So absolutely, the idea that they are two completely separate elements that are either aligned with each other or fighting each other, I think is impossible for that to be a reality. I think it is, Afghanistan as a country is way too fluid. So they get that one gate, and maybe they were out in a valley, they got taken by ISIS, made some great relationships, and Muhammad messaged Habib and said, hey, I'm coming in, I'm still with ISIS, are you with me? They had a good relationship down at the tribal level, said, sure, I'll let you through. That it's really down to the grassroots level as kind of those metrics happen. And for us to put true analysis on that would be impossible.
So if you could please tell us the lay of the land then, in terms of, and you were describing a little bit of this, alluding to some of this, but what are Afghans in particular who are trying, like the interpreters that you've worked with and so many of your colleagues in arms have been forging relationships with and relied upon, from interpreters to intelligence sources to et cetera, whomever may even be on those lists that the United States purportedly gave to the Taliban? What are the hurdles that they're reaching, from getting to Taliban checkpoints to getting to the United States and getting into the airport, especially as we only have 5 days since President Biden has insisted that he wants to hold to the August 31st deadline?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple things there. So just because there's an August 31st deadline, we need time to pull out. So you're probably looking at another 24 hours maybe of the ability to actually get people out. The airport was completely locked down. There is word that they are getting still AMSITs through that can get to the gate. So there's definitely still some relationships with the Taliban and the Taliban letting people through as those kind of logistics happen. A lot of the people that we were working is we pushed them away from the airfield. We'll figure out whatever the next phase is. A lot of the planning to that I'm not going to speak to, just because frankly, I don't know who watches your show and where that information ends up. And there's a lot that's being worked, but just know that it is chaos right there. I think there's still a lot of people on the ground that are trying to get anyone into the airfield through any metric possible, as planes can still be going. And then a lot of us are just starting to plan phase 2, phase 3, and figure out any other avenue. Whether it's border operations or things like that, just kind of prepping for it.
One thing that President Biden said is that they would continue to work after August 31st to extract Americans, especially, of course, but also allies and folks that have done so much on our behalf. But I'm thinking about how difficult of an ordeal that will be once the United States doesn't have a military presence there. And I know you're thinking about that, because this is exactly what you're trying to help, is getting Afghans who've done so much for our country, for their own country, out of Afghanistan.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that's going to come in is corruption, and we're already hearing stories from people who are trying to get out to the borders, and the exorbitant amounts that people at the borders, or even people who have set up sua sponte checkpoints along the way, are trying to extort from the people in the vans or the cars or whatever it may be, basically giving up everything they have, or tell them, hey, you either go back and find this money or you're not getting by. I believe that and something I'm trying to do is build out relationship with the NGOs and some of the organizations that'll still be there afterwards. Organizations that are everywhere, USAID, things like that. Once we don't truly have that military presence, and hopefully they can make a difference. I think so much is unknown right now, Jimmy. Truly, what is like you said before, the biggest thing that needs to get figured out is what is the relationship between ISIS and the Taliban. I saw a report yesterday that the influx of people into Afghanistan from Pakistan, now that we are leaving, thinking that they're coming for peace, it was like 40,000 people over the past couple of days have come back to Afghanistan. And where do they go? Where do their allegiances lie? What if Taliban tries to implement truly a governmental structure? How does ISIS feel about that? ISIS has a much stricter interpretation of the Quran than the Taliban does, and at least from my knowledge. So seeing how that ties down, and then again, in general, when the Afghan had their government, as I said, that you have the nationalist laws and stuff that are national laws and national infrastructure that comes out from Kabul, but people in the valleys truly don't care. If the Taliban's there, and then they truly still have people in all the valleys, does that give more of a trickle-down effect of command and control that really locks the country down? I think it's about to be a nightmare for women. No matter what the Taliban leader says, it's going to be. He's trying to have a more inclusive environment per se within the rules of the Quran, but women having some more rights and stuff. But man, I just don't personally see it.
Oh, I can't fathom, and I've never dealt with the Taliban, but from what I know, it seems stunning to me to even think that anybody would believe that they have sort of changed their tune. Just a couple minutes left with you, and I so appreciate your time today, Sergeant First Class Lindsey Meringer, retired. When we look at the situation on the ground, at this moment for American servicemen and women, one of the arguments for holding to the August 31st deadline is that if we don't, then we put American troops in greater harm's way because we're not holding to that deadline. We're there longer. We risk more terrorist attacks, etc. And that's one of the driving reasons, according to President Biden, that he has decided to make sure that we stick to that deadline or thereabouts. What do you make of that and the constant threat right now and moving forward to American forces in Afghanistan?
I mean, I think that's where the big disconnect is on what they want and what we're willing to do as service members. We join the military at every level. Conventional guys, your supply guy, join the military to serve his country. Granted, this isn't. I'm gonna have to answer this, I guess, from a special operations aspect, because I think there is a difference in the defending of our country that people join for them and have their beliefs in, and then the experiences that we have in operators and the relationship that we build with these people who have helped fight terrorism that I believe is defending our country. As I mentioned before, all of us as operators, and I can confidently say that I speak for probably most of us, would happily go there and secure that city to and put our lives on the line. If I got killed, getting the rest of the American citizens out, and then the NMRG and people like that, but especially even people who may not share the NMRG feeling or the Turk feeling, but there's a lot of American citizens still there, and we're leaving them. At least it seems. And we would go in happily. My wife would probably be pretty upset, but I would, I've tried to get on a couple different contracts to go over there when there was rumor going around that was a thing, and it ended up not being real. But there's a bunch of us who are trying to go help, and actually outside of what we're doing, through our computers, through our cell phone.
I have two final questions for you, sir. Number one, what do you think of the potential future for the Northern Alliance, which, of course, for so many years has been battling against the Taliban? I'm sorry?
Yeah. I think we froze there for a second, but we froze there for a second. But yeah, in kind of summation, we would be happy to go put our life on the line to get the rest of the people out.
So
and for them to speak to that is wrong.
Sure. So what the question that I was asking, I guess we did get lost in freezing translation there too. I was asking about the Northern Alliance. They've been against the Taliban for a long time. What do you think their future is?
That's even tough to say. There's a lot of talk about getting fighters out to Panjshir, and because as that Mossad and holding that area that the Taliban just doesn't want to go to. That is foreign territory to them. I think that the initial thing that we're going to need to see is what does the Taliban do with Kabul and the areas surrounding in terms of setting up the government. They really need to make the transition from, if you want to use the term, just a flat terrorist organization, or just kind of a shadow government is probably what I would call them, honestly, with what I've seen on the ground there and kind of over the years. But them having the responsibility of truly being back in power right now with the world stage and navigating with world leaders, and then we'll see how they deal with the different tribes in the Northern Alliance and different regions. I think it's just way too early to kind of figure that out. They have such a monumental task ahead of them in truly implementing a government with the whole world's eyes on them. Then we really just need to see that play out.
And final question, is there anything you would like to add that maybe you think people should know about as we ponder the crisis in Afghanistan, our allies, the situation for the American people, whatever?
Yeah, I suppose two things. If you vote for anyone who was in the last administration or this administration in the next election cycle, I'd like to tell you to go F yourself, because that is frankly done this, and we are so broken as a political system. I think there is going to be an incredible amount of vet outrage after all this plays out that I am really interested to see how that goes. But the thing that I really want people to sit on and look at, because they just watch the news, they watch Fox News or CNN or whatever it may be, depending on their political affiliation. But what I've seen and not watching any of that is chat rooms, WhatsApp chats and Signal chats filled with people who are just giving up their day jobs and, giving up their lives. So many people pulling 16, 20, 24, 48-hour shifts. A guy who's done a lot, he just finally had to bed down after a 48-hour shift of just crushing it. And the amount of people that are out there on the computers that the regular people, your listeners will never know what they've done, is staggering. And it's emotional to see. It brings me a lot of pride in our community, not even in the special operations community, which is a lot of the people that I'm tied into in the groups. But there's a lot of conventional folks and retirees. They're at every level. There's some people in there as an E4 reservist. He was like, guys, I don't have a lot of clout here, but I'm here to help in however I can. And it's stuff like that is so awesome to see. So I want people to take some of that away with all the negativity that we're seeing on the news and social media, is put out some love out there for the people behind the scenes that are just crushing themselves right now to make a difference. We are, and there's a lot of people who care.
That's so true. I think it's wonderful for you to make that point, especially since you are working with so many of those who are stepping up, who aren't overseas right now, who are trying to do what they can here, as you are, and who are on the ground in Afghanistan, Americans and Afghans alike, doing their level best here in the midst of just a horrible crisis in Kabul, a humanitarian disaster waiting to happen, but that's already underway, but especially waiting to happen. And I just have to say, I admire you for what you've given for our country, for your incredible service. I know you're medically retired and would be eager to go and help as much as you could, but I so appreciate what you've done, whether it's in Afghanistan or in Africa, anywhere that you have been stationed and what you're doing right now. Sergeant First Class Lindsey Meringer, thank you so much for that and for your time today, as well as on Saturday when we spoke on the radio. I'm very grateful for your insights.
Hey, I have one alibi if I have a second.
Sure, please.
So we are going to be, I had a lot of people reach out and see how they could donate because they don't know what else to do. And I didn't have any mechanism. And I don't currently, but what we're building out is, so last year I got a Terp out, and he's in California right now. We did a GoFundMe, raised like $20,000 in a matter of 2 days. Got him a car. Outside of that, we used our networks to get him a job. It was excellent. There's a lot of people that are going to be coming to the States, hopefully, and we are going to need, these people are coming to work. We're going to need jobs for them. We're going to need some initial, rent for them. Car, you can't do anything here without a car unless you're really in a city. But stay tuned as you see some of these programs start to go out for fundraising. As I text with you, and as we develop some stuff out, I'll shoot you a message.
Please do. But happy to share.
People, your listeners, keep an eye out on social media and stuff. You start to see some of these charities go up, just donate. Or if you are an entrepreneur like myself, find a job for them. That's probably even more valuable. Get them employment. These people are animals when it comes to work ethic. And yeah, so that's what I would say on my lasting note.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, Sergeant First Class Lindsey Meringer, for everything. Appreciate your time tonight and your insights and all that you're doing, and everybody else. Our best and thoughts and prayers to them, to everybody who's working hard and diligently here. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jimmy. Bye.
Once again, Lindsay Maringer joining us here on a special live stream of Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. And what passionate points, what strong points. I appreciate all that these men and women in uniform and out of uniform are doing for our country right now and for our allies. Look, I know we want to focus on Americans. Of course, we need to. We need to get our American people out. We should not be leaving Americans behind, period, full stop. But we also need to be concerned for our Afghan allies and partners that have done so much for us in this past 20-year period. We shouldn't leave them high and dry. We're going to take a quick break here on a special live stream, Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm producing myself this evening, too, so we'll see how things progress as the time goes. But when we come back, I'm going to speak with Keith Nobles, good friend of mine, author of the novel Our Dogs Did Not Bark, but he was a contractor to the military intelligence community back in the last decade of the Cold War. He's seen the fallout of America's situation with the Cold War and, of course, with pulling out of Saigon in Vietnam and how we left that country. And when it comes to Afghanistan and with the Soviets experience and so forth, we're going to dive into that and more coming up with Keith Nobles. And then later, my interview with former ambassador to Bahrain, Sam Zakhem, will happen. And I'm looking forward to that conversation, sharing that with you if you've missed it, delving into some of the fallout here. But in this break, I'm going to play a video that the Millennial Policy Center put together back in 2019. It's a think tank that I ran for a spell and founded. And this video features Ambassador Zakhem, as well as Samuel Laurie, who was a fellow at the Millennial Policy Center and is a fellow at the Centennial Institute in Colorado. And we talked about what the Trump administration was doing in terms of their Middle East peace plan, especially vis-a-vis the Arab countries and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We've got that rolling, and then we'll be back with Keith Nobles. Stay with us. Special report, Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't go anywhere.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The Middle East is a complex and complicated place. What's remarkable right now is how the Trump administration has come in with a very fresh perspective and put forward a plan to achieve peace through prosperity.
Previous administrations had always focused on trying to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and then normalizing relations between Israel and the broader Arab world. Well, the Trump administration has kind of turned that idea on its head. Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, and others, and have been working behind the scenes to bring the Arab powers, especially in the Gulf, together with Israel and really get their buy-in and support and build those relations out more, and then be able to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
But if President Trump goes ahead with his policies of strengthening the economy on the West Bank and even in Gaza, despite the presence of Hamas there, I think the people's attitude will change to the positive and would be more likely to accept a peace accord between them and the Israelis.
So in the economic part of the plan, they want to raise $50 billion of foreign direct investment into the Israeli, the Palestinian economy, and then also the Lebanese, Jordanian, and Egyptian economies so that there can be more integration broadly between all of those. But they want to provide the capital necessary for businesses to flourish, for job creation. They're doing this across all sectors of the economy. They're also trying to work on governance issues, property rights, rule of law, things like that, so that the investments can be safe and the investors can rest assured that their investment is protected.
How do you think the economic prosperity that this plan would hopefully bring about could disincentivize millennials and younger people who are in the Middle East from starting to get involved in terrorist groups in the future?
I mean, the State Department, the government's done many research studies, and it's pretty conclusive that terrorist groups thrive where there's poverty, where there's low education, low literacy rates. They thrive on preying on people like that to enlist them in their cause of Allah or whatever they're claiming to stand for. So the more we can expose them to education, increase the literacy rates, increase the economic opportunities, the less likely they are going to want to join these terrorist organizations. When we present these business opportunities, and they just see that peace is going to be a all-around better solution for them to work between the Israelis and the Arabs working together, they're going to see it's going to create a more prosperous future.
As I talk to Arabs and Israelis, friends of mine, there is a changing attitude among both of them, and God willing, there will be peace with the economic policies and the strong foreign policy by the Trump administration.
To learn more and watch our full documentary featuring more in-depth insights on this unique approach to achieving peace in the Middle East, click on the link below to our website, millennialpolicycenter.org.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Are you all right with being a shark maverick? Was it okay to team up with you?
I'm good, man. We're a part. It's a partnership. We're like this, Jimmy. I got you.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
Welcome back, Jimmy at the Crossroads, special live stream edition of the program with a very special report on chaos in Kabul. What is happening in Afghanistan? That's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. My utmost thanks to Lindsay Maringer, Special Forces retired, specifically for the 10th Special Forces Group Airborne. He was with the group for I believe, his entire run or just about in Special Forces, which, as I understand it, is unheard of. Very rare to have that extensive amount of time in part of the same Special Forces group. He's a Sergeant First Class retired, and what phenomenal insights and information being offered by Sergeant First Class Meringer, an incredible man. We appreciate his support for those who are in need in Afghanistan, continuing the work even after having been medically discharged from the U.S. military. Now I am so pleased on this edition of the program where we're live and I am self-producing the show. So far, I think it's going pretty good. I don't have any wood by me. Otherwise, I do a little knock on wood. But Keith Nobles was a contractor to the military intelligence community for the last decade of the Cold War. He saw the fallout from Saigon, from the Soviet involvement in Afghanistan, from their own experience as well. He saw the end of the evil empire that was the Soviet Union. And I've been talking with him quite a bit throughout the Afghan crisis. He knows a heck of a lot, and I am so pleased to lend his experience to tonight's special report. Keith Nobles, my friend, welcome back.
Hey, good to see you, Jimmy.
It's good to have you here, my friend, and I should note that Keith Nobles is author of the novel, A Dystopian Tale. Our Dogs Did Not Bark, and I appreciate you taking some time tonight, Keith. So let me just ask you a question, because I know you are fired up from your writings, from our conversations, from your vantage point, especially as a former military intel guy. What is going on right now in Afghanistan, and where did things really break down?
It's FUBAR. I mean, that's what it is.
Break down what the acronym means.
I don't know. It's a family show.
That's
Effed
right.
up beyond all recognition.
There you go.
That's what that means.
Right.
And it's hard to find. So let's be really clear. The soldiers on the ground, I don't think anybody has any doubt, are working valiantly to get this done. And as your previous guest, I mean, representative of that, to get these people out to accomplish their mission. That's not where the problem is. The problem here is with the politicians, and it's hard to find anything with the politicians, the bureaucrats, the generals, that's gone right, that was planned well. It's just, what do you find here that went right? You're hard pressed to find anything here that has gone right, that was done well, that was planned well, that was executed well. Joe Biden, and it was weeks ago that the Taliban laid siege to Kandahar. It wasn't just 12 days ago or 11 days ago, like they're saying in these press conferences, but weeks ago, that it became obvious the Taliban was on the march. It became obvious that the Afghan army was collapsing. And of all the options Joe Biden had at his disposal, he chose none of them. He just let the whole thing continue. You just can't even fathom how and why they would do this. Joe Biden is the most powerful man in the world with the most choices of anyone in the world, commanding the most powerful military in the world. And he repeatedly tells us, well, I had no choice. That's just an absolute, complete failure of leadership here.
Well, in terms of that failure of leadership, though, I mean, obviously the buck goes up to the president, although when I was talking with Sergeant First Class Meringer, who served in 2016 and 2017 in Afghanistan, he was placing the blame on both of the Biden administration and the Trump administration before that, and really going back to the beginning. And I think there is a lot of blame to go around. But what do you think is uniquely significant about what Biden has done here as our current commander-in-chief, Keith Nobles?
It's not even that we came up with a plan for how to do this. I mean, my impression is that the Biden administration simply didn't care how this was done. And I think they maybe assumed other people were not going to care how this was done. And they did it. Honestly, Jimmy, the United States military teaches how to do these things. And they did this completely in a manner opposite of what the United States military teaches people to do. You keep the strong points, you keep the military intact, you get the civilians out, you get the equipment out, you get the soldiers out. And we did this in completely reverse order. There's something here that your previous guest alluded to several times, and in fact his activities. It's against the American ethos here to leave anyone behind. Yet here we are. We're leaving thousands, potentially thousands of Americans behind, and tens of thousands of Afghans behind. It completely violates our conscience as Americans. I mean, that's really, I've talked to so many people who are so angry and seething about this. And when it comes down to it, that's what we're really angry about, is it's a violation of American morality, a violation of American ethos to leave these people behind. And that Joe Biden believes he can extend this deadline after he obviously failed to plan to get the people out, that he's taking his marching orders, it would appear, from the Taliban, It's just unacceptable.
I've
all the way
never
around.
heard or seen of anything like this, where a U.S. president puts an artificial deadline on himself, agreed to by an enemy, and then allows the enemy to hold us to that artificial deadline, even if it means leaving behind Americans or our allies who are pissed to high heaven. Heck, Keith Nobles, last week, the British House of Commons voted to hold the President of the United States in contempt. I don't know that that's ever been done before. Maybe it has. To my knowledge, it hasn't, certainly not in modern times.
No, and comments from the German government, the French government. I mean, look, when the French are out there patrolling Kabul, retrieving their own people and bringing them back to the airport, and Joe Biden says the United States Army and Marine Corps can't do that, of course the United States Army and Marine Corps can do that. He doesn't have the will to do it. He doesn't have the honor to do it, to be quite frank. I mean, that's really what this feels like to so many of us, is a complete violation of American honor. We're behaving in a dishonorable way and making endless excuses for why we don't have a choice but to behave in a dishonorable way. And of course we have a choice not to be dishonorable. Joe Biden has the ability to make a different choice, and he refuses to do so.
Now, in terms of the policy decisions at this point in this time frame, I mean, clearly we can go over the blunders, how he failed, how his generals failed, top military brass, going to Sergeant First Class Meringer's point, clearly didn't prepare for any sort of contingency like this. They didn't abide the intelligence that we know they were given that said that Kabul would fall in no time, that it would happen in like a matter of days. I believe that's what the intelligence said, Keith Nobles. And so when we look at the current state of affairs with just several days left to go, at least in the Biden timeline, what do you think you should do differently, especially particularly in the wake of a terrorist attack today that took at least 13 lives of American servicemen and more, hopefully not, but more likely to come even today? And we have casualties other than that, Americans. We've lost a lot of Afghan lives today.
We lost more lives today in Afghanistan than we lost cumulatively over the last several years.
Yeah.
In withdrawing. I mean, it's horrific. It was done horrifically. And again, it's not the soldiers' fault on the ground who are doing this.
No, not at all.
They're behaving valiantly and bravely. It's like a veteran today I talked to said that, you know, those guys out there, when those people approach them at the airport, and they're the ones who have to search them for bombs, and they're the ones who have to just, you know, get the papers, right? That's just pure guts. There's no way to protect those soldiers, as we found out today. There's just no way to protect those soldiers. That's just pure courage to be out there doing that, person by person, with thousands upon thousands of people. And you don't know which one has a bomb strapped on. That's just incredible courage to just go do that job. And sadly, we had, I believe last numbers I saw were 13 killed and 15 wounded who were doing that job today.
Right. So Keith Nobles, let me jump in and ask you to respond to this, which was Joe Biden, President of the United States, speaking today in a press conference. He actually took several questions. I think he got off list after a couple, but he said he was instructed, and we'll get to this, but he was instructed, literally used the word instructed, to follow through with a particular list that he was given. But I want you to respond to this statement and see if this is firm enough for you and firm enough for the Taliban and the terrorists in Afghanistan to get it through their thick skulls that the United States means business.
To those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes America harm, know this: we will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay. I will defend our interests and our people with every measure at my command.
Do you think they believe him?
No. There's a vast gulf here between what Joe Biden has been promising and what Joe Biden has been delivering on Afghanistan for several weeks now. And what he is saying and what is actually happening are not connected to reality. The idea that we're going to hunt them down while we're withdrawing, That seems a little impractical to me. Now, maybe you could find out who they are, and maybe you could hit them with a Hellfire missile from a drone, and that's entirely possible to do. But we're losing our intelligence assets in Afghanistan. As you know, you alluded to with your previous guest, we have apparently given a list to the Taliban of all the Afghanis who worked with us. How did that even happen? Those people will now be marked for death. So exactly who's going to give us the intelligence here on who did this and how to find them? And like I said before, it's FUBAR. There's nothing about this that seems to be done in any conscious, deliberate, planned way to be successful. Nothing about this entire effort.
I want to ask you to
any marks of that.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you to respond to something else that Biden said. I don't have a clip for this, but he said, quote, "I know of no conflict as a student of history where when a war was ended, one side was guaranteed that everyone they wanted would get out." I was just beside myself hearing those words coming from the President of the United States, especially because it is Joe Biden who set this artificial timetable for August 31st.
Yeah, and in that press conference this afternoon, Joe Biden started out saying, we're not going to get everybody out. That's what he said. And a little bit later, we're going to say, we're not going to get out as many as we can. And then he comes up with the statement you just read. And all in the same press conference. I mean, the reality is, like I said before, what Joe Biden is promising and what Joe Biden is delivering bear no resemblance to each other. None whatsoever. And everybody sees what he's delivering. I saw a poll yesterday. I'm not a big fan of polls, but not surprisingly, 74% of Americans thought Joe Biden has screwed this up. We've talked, Jimmy, at length over different topics, from COVID to election integrity to the economy. That we have this huge problem in this country with trust, and with trust of these officials, these politicians, these bureaucrats, these generals. And this is why we have this gulf of trust, because Joe Biden comes out and says things repeatedly that we see with our own eyes are disconnected from reality. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe Joe Biden. I don't think the Taliban believe Joe Biden. I don't think the soldiers on the ground believe Joe Biden. I don't think Joe Biden will remember tomorrow morning what he said today, to be honest. I mean, that's just a situation we're in. We're back to somebody instructed me to do this. Okay, well, who instructed Joe Biden on who to call in? Who's running the country? If Joe Biden's not deciding these things, who is? Who's deciding them for him? I mean, this is brewing into be a much larger crisis than just a fouled up withdrawal.
Again, we're talking with Keith Nobles, who for about a decade was an intelligence contractor to the military intelligence community. Here's another clip from Biden's press conference just this evening.
We will not be deterred by terrorists. We will not let them stop our mission. We will continue the evacuation. I've also ordered my commanders to develop operational plans to strike ISIS-K assets, leadership, and facilities. We will respond with force and precision at our time, at the place we choose, in the moment of our choosing. Here's what you need to know. These ISIS terrorists will not win. We will rescue the Americans who are there. We will get our Afghan allies out, and our mission will go on. America will not be intimidated, and I have the utmost confidence in our brave service members who continue to execute this mission with courage and honor to save lives and get Americans, our partners, our Afghan allies out of Afghanistan.
We've got that, plus U.S. forces going into near China as what should be a show of force, I guess, against China. Yep. And why I want to bring both of these up, both his tough talk in his speech tonight, and also him going into sending 3 carriers and military jets and so forth into the vicinity of China to send a message about Taiwan, is how seriously, how credibly can our adversaries and our enemies actually take these sorts of things from Biden when they see before our very eyes and before their very eyes what the Taliban is doing is dictating terms to the government, president of the United States, and while hurting, killing American soldiers.
Well, and American civilians.
Yes. And civilians, absolutely.
I mean, it's not just the soldiers. It's civilians that are out there trying to get to the airport who are
not able to get there, getting beaten.
That's right. In some cases, being beaten. If you're an Afghan and have papers to exit the country, the Taliban will oftentimes do worse than just beat you. I mean, there's no credibility here because there's no relationship to reality. And Joe Biden likes to keep saying, well, the buck stops here, as he blames everyone else and assures us this is all going swimmingly. I think we can all see with our own eyes, none of this is going swimmingly. And when Biden and the generals and Austin say, well, this is what we planned for, how did you plan for this? You couldn't come up with a better plan than this? Right? And obviously there is no plan B, C, D, E. You just can't even imagine why they thought this would be acceptable to anyone. I mean, that's really the mystery here. Why these people thought that doing this in this manner would be acceptable to anyone. Your previous guest mentioned, there's going to be a lot of vet rage over this. There already is. I talked to a fellow today who was an Air Force officer and who spent much of the last 20 years working with veterans coming back from the global war on terror. And he said he's never seen in his entire military career and working with the military, he's never seen anything as screwed up as this is. It just can't fathom it, Jimmy.
There's also the question of the Taliban and trust. Do you trust the Taliban? And while they say, no, we don't trust the Taliban, they do 2 things. One, they are counting, at least to some extent, although Sergeant First Class Lindsey Meringer was a little uncertain of the extent to which the U.S. government is actually relying upon the Taliban for security outside the international airport there in Kabul, although all indications from the media reports are that they are just assuming that the first layer, which is really intended, as Meringer pointed out, to block out any Afghans that are trying to get to the airport to flee the country, that they're relying upon the Taliban. So regardless, they've got this relationship to whatever extent. Maybe they're providing, as reports indicate, names of Americans and other allies and Afghans so that they can have a kill list, basically, or a slave list so that they can sell the women into slavery. I mean, we know how the Taliban operates, but you got that going on. Or you have Biden saying, quote, it's not a matter of trust, it's a matter of mutual self-interest. But there's no evidence so far that I've been given that there has been collusion between the Taliban and ISIS in carrying out what happened today, both in front of the hotel and what is expected to continue beyond today. It's not a matter of trust. It's a matter of mutual self-interest. I saw somebody, Keith, put on Facebook saying, how can you trust the self-interest of someone who's willing to blow themselves up?
Well, yes, exactly. We have spent 20 years shooting each other, the Taliban in the United States military. And Biden says we now have mutual self-interest. Well, what exactly is that mutual self-interest? Inform us of what that is. Because we keep getting told by these administration officials that the Taliban and ISIS-K hate each other. They don't like each other. But it's the Taliban who let several thousand members of ISIS-K out of Afghan prisons here in the last 2 weeks. If they hated them so much, why did they let them out of prison? And obviously, okay, maybe not so obviously, that's probably the incorrect way to view it, but the Taliban at best was less than diligent this morning in that ISIS-K drove apparently a car bomb and someone with apparently a suicide vest right up to the airport in Kabul. I mean, you heard the Pentagon briefing today from CENTCOM saying that they've asked the Taliban to push back the perimeter. Right? So obviously they're relying on the Taliban to do this. And it's just mind-boggling, Jimmy. It simply is. We spent 20 years mastering this situation, and I'm among that 70% of Americans who believe withdrawal was the correct thing to do.
Me too.
But you know what? You cannot screw this up so badly. I mean, for anybody who's been around this, who's worked with the military, who's been in the military, they don't do things this way. There's ways to do things, and they know how to do it. And why they decided not to do what they not to follow the plan this time.
So I want to broaden this out. You and I have talked about the Cold War, that you've argued for years the United States has been in with China since the mid-90s. Presuming that you are right, and we've had some great conversations that indicate you are, what message does this disaster send to China, or maybe to the Russians and to the Iranians, who, by the way, still have a presence in Afghanistan, who are not cutting and running, who are going to make sure that their people are safe in their embassies, whether they have to shoot people in order to do it or they bribe them in order to do it, whatever it takes, they're going to do it. What message does it send to our adversaries, especially China, with the U.S. handling it so badly like this and looking so poorly?
Well, so right now the message it sends is inept. But here's the further problem we're going to see here, Jimmy, as I keep referring to, because this is really important to understand. Joe Biden is promising things he can almost certainly be able to deliver. And when he does that, it's going to further erode the credibility of the United States. That's really important to understand. It's not just what's happening now. It's when those Americans who we leave behind become hostages. It's when we potentially have to ransom them. It's those sorts of things are going to continue to diminish and corrode the credibility of the United States, and they're going to continue to diminish and corrode our relationships with our other allies, and it's going to continue to embolden people like China. Why would China not be emboldened here? I mean, yes, we sent apparently have sent 3 aircraft carriers, a number of aircraft to the Western Pacific to make a statement to China, and I applaud that. I think that's probably the right thing to do right now. But does China think we're competent enough to defend, say, Taiwan? I mean, that's a legitimate question. I mean, we're politically and at the top tiers of the military not competent at the moment to defend Kabul. China's probably weighing their chances right now, weighing the opportunity. They can wait. They have some time. Biden or Harris will be around 3 more years.
Keith, I want to get to something that you've been mentioning to me for the past few days. And I've been going, look, this is horrible. What's going on here? And you're saying, just wait until the hostages. Just wait until the hostages. Now with Biden conceding that he's going to leave Americans behind, that issue of hostages becomes very, very real, especially insofar as it is a money tool for them to hold Americans for ransom at high dollar sums. And of course, the U.S. government has a policy. We won't engage in those kinds of negotiations with terrorists. And yet it would be because of Biden leaving people behind, the military leadership leaving people behind with Biden, that would even happen.
Yeah, I mean, somebody made the reference a couple of days ago, and it's an apropos analogy. Biden sunk the ship, and now he's bragging about how many lifeboats he has. Right? I mean, it's really what this is right now. And as far as hostages go, you will have Americans left behind. Those Americans become prisoners of the Taliban or prisoners of ISIS-K or any number of other groups that may appear in the future, in the near-term future, in Afghanistan in this environment. Yeah, and they will want to ransom them. And there will almost undoubtedly become, in that situation, given how our world operates on the internet, there will be videos of American men and women being raped, tortured, murdered, being put out on the internet. I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that we're probably looking at having happen, because we have these groups who would like nothing more than to humiliate the United States and humiliate Americans and show the world just how powerless we are. And that's just, this is why you can't leave Americans behind. This is why you just, that is just a violation of everything we stand for.
Well, Keith, one thing, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So one thing I know we wanted to talk about, because Biden, he condemned the idea of, said he didn't even want us to be there doing a long-term sort of nation building effort or anything like that. But as you pointed out to me, in February 2002, Biden, then a U.S. senator, said, quote, "History is going to judge us very harshly, I believe, if we allow the hope of a liberated Afghanistan to evaporate because we are fearful of the phrase nation building." Your reaction? 2002.
Joe Biden has spent all these years, since September 11, 2001, voting for and supporting the nation building effort in Afghanistan. Every vote he took, he supported it. Okay. When he was vice president, Barack Obama certainly engaged in those activities. Joe Biden was certainly part of that. Joe Biden is trying to rewrite history. And again, we go right back to the whole trust and credibility thing. And that's what these people in Washington, D.C. and many places around this country are not grasping right now, is they're throwing away the whole game here just to avoid having to say the words, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." Trust is diminishing quickly. For us, for the United States military, for the intelligence agencies, for organizations like the FBI with a national defense mission to continue to do those missions and defend this country, it requires trust. And we are throwing that trust away.
Well, with the American people,
the egos of
with our
politicians.
allies, so much.
Yeah, all along the way, Jimmy. I mean, the United States operates to a large degree off of trust, because by and large, despite all the failures we point to, the United States has proven itself over the last 100 years to be an eminently trustworthy nation. We will sign up to do something, we will do it. But we're throwing that away. And that is the ultimate tragedy of this whole situation. And groups like the Taliban and ISIS-K and the People's Republic of China and Putin's Russia are going to make every effort to exaggerate and note and publicize.
Well, I heard
the
on
United States cannot be trusted.
Absolutely, they already are. In fact, right away,
they already are.
The Global Times, which is a Chinese Communist Party outlet, really, they already were telling Hong Kong, you can't count on the United States for you, which is like and that was before the extent of the chaos had even really unfolded to this point. But we've only got a few minutes left with you, Keith, and I just want to ask, is there anything that we haven't touched on, any aspects of this, especially from your experience as a military intelligence contractor during the Cold War? You saw the fallout from what happened in Saigon. You've made comparisons to Saigon here in this particular situation. More today, we were seeing comparisons like saying it's Saigon and Benghazi sort of put together, but even worse, at least from the American standpoint. I think there's a lot of truth in that. But you also saw the Soviets and how they left Afghanistan. I mean, the Russians were even gloating that, look, when the Soviet Union left Afghanistan, their government was still intact for 3 years before it fell.
They took their equipment.
Right. And here we've got all of this U.S. military equipment, the Black Hawk helicopters, the jets, you name it, all the weapons, so many weapons that are in their hands. So with all that in mind, go ahead, please.
Now, here's the bottom line to this whole thing, Jimmy. You have Biden, you have Harris, you have Milley, you have Austin. You have the Secretary of State, who's obviously inept. we need to quickly find some adults in the room here, or this is going to be a very, very bad and bloody 3 years. Where are those adults going to come from? Who are they? I don't know, but we quickly need some adults in the room to stand up here and make some adult level decisions and own the things that are happening, own what is likely to happen, prepare the American people for what is likely to happen. And just be adults.
From your vantage point,
we've got a long time here.
What should they be looking at from an intelligence perspective, perhaps, or from a strategic perspective at this point? Because you're saying we need adults in the room, but what should the adults even be looking at doing or making feasible to happen at this point?
So right now, the adults need to be honest with the American people and take ownership of this. That's number one, what has to happen, right? As far as intelligence goes, we have real problems on the horizon. China is developing quantum communications. They are ostensibly ahead of us in developing that. And when they are successful with that, then to a large degree, the United States will probably be blind in the intelligence world compared to what we are right now.
Right.
This is a major problem in the near future that very few people are discussing. We have been on top for a long time, and we like I said, we have some major challenges in front of us, and we need some adults in the room who can be honest and frank with the American people about what those challenges are and how we're going to deal with them. And Biden, Harris, Austin, Milley, those are not the people who are going to be the adults in the room, and not the people who are being honest with the American people about what these challenges are.
Yeah.
And that's a major problem.
And finally, what should the American people be watching for in the next several days? And is there anything you'd like to add before we cut you loose, Keith Nobles?
You know, I most everybody in this country is in the same boat right now. We're hoping we can get as many of these people out as we can. And that is looking like a dim hope given what happened today. All right. State Department has repeatedly told people, don't go to the airport, then go to the airport, don't go to the airport. It's completely unclear at the moment what the safety is of going to the airport of Kabul if you're an American citizen or an Afghan with papers to get out. Even if you get through the Taliban, are you going to get blown up when you get there, when you're waiting in line?
And Keith, Lindsay Maringer earlier said he was on the phone, had been talking with somebody on the ground there who was beaten by the Taliban.
Yeah.
Those stories are coming from all over the place. We see the stories of Taliban going door to door, hunting down allies of the Americans. And soon enough, especially once the Americans are left behind, Americans themselves will be ending up on that side or hostages. Go ahead.
There are Americans outside of Kabul. There are Americans in Kandahar and Herat and other cities in Afghanistan who have no chance of getting to the Kabul airport, hundreds of miles in some cases. And we're just leaving those people to whatever fate the Taliban wants to dish out to them. And like I said, it's a violation of everything we believe to be American. It's a violation of our ethos. It's a violation of our morality. And I guess what's really shocking here, Jimmy, is the callousness of Biden and Harris and Milley and Austin about that very thing. How we got such a callous group of people at the top of this food chain. We need to examine that. We need to figure out why. What did we do that America deserved to have people who would literally abandon their fellow Americans to the Taliban? That's really something we need to figure out soon.
Keith Nobles, author of the novel Our Dogs Did Not Bark, a politically incorrect dystopian tale, and for about a decade, during the last years of the Cold War, was a contractor to the military intelligence community. Thank you so much for taking the time this evening. I really appreciate you joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads to break down one of the great travesties in American history, particularly on a foreign policy stage.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Once again, Keith Noble's joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Always appreciate what he has to say about these situations. The kind of crises that we are facing in this country just keep multiplying. It really does seem like Joe Biden doesn't know what he's doing, that he's asleep at the wheel. You know, it was put out on Twitter, one word to describe Biden right now at this moment. I said lost. Because he doesn't know what is going on. That is abundantly apparent. Now, one last thing I want to do before we get to my interview with former ambassador to Bahrain, Sam Zakhem, to wrap this up. Here's a clip. This is Biden and Steve Doocy, or Peter Doocy, at the Fox News channel, going sort of toe-to-toe here a little bit. Great questions by Peter Doocy. It was the last question and answer portion of Biden's press conference tonight. And look, the reality is that Joe Biden is on a list. He's got his list. He said, I've been instructed to do this list. And he went off the list for, I think, a couple of questions. But he took Doocy's questions. Take a listen to a little bit of this exchange.
Mr. President, there had not been a U.S. service member killed in combat in Afghanistan since February of 2020. You set a deadline, you pulled troops out, you sent troops back in, and now 12 Marines are dead. You said the buck stops with you. Do you bear any responsibility for the way that things have unfolded in the last 2 weeks?
I bear responsibility for fundamentally all that's happened of late. But here's the deal. You know, I wish you'd one day say these things. You know as well as I do that the former president made a deal with the Taliban that he would get all American forces out of Afghanistan by May 1. In return, the commitment was made, and that was a year before. In return, he was given a commitment that the Taliban would continue to attack others, but would not attack any American forces. Remember that? I'm being serious. No, I'm asking you a question. Because before... No, wait a minute. I'm asking you a question. Is that accurate, the best of your knowledge? What?
I don't think it's the issue that... do you think that people have an issue with pulling out of Afghanistan or just the way that things have happened?
I think they have an issue that people are likely to get hurt. Some, as we've seen, have gotten killed, and that it is messy. The reason why, whether my friend will acknowledge it or has reported it, the reason why there were no attacks on Americans, as you said, from the date until I came into office, was because the commitment was made by President Trump, I will be out by May 1st. In the meantime, you agree not to attack any Americans. That was the deal. That's why no American was attacked.
I just... seeing Biden specifically and singularly blame Trump. Now, to his credit-ish, not really. It took him until the end of the press conference to finally blame the former President Trump. But it took him until the end. Nevertheless, he still did it. And he said that he put this on Trump. Now, look, he didn't need to hold any deal. He could have extended it longer. He could have said, look, we need more time, and if you don't cooperate, there will be consequences. This is the United States of America. We don't get pushed around just because somebody else made some deal that you thought couldn't be moved. You think Donald Trump wouldn't have moved it if he felt it was necessary to get more time? You think he wouldn't have said to the Taliban, look, you better do what I'm saying or else there will be serious consequences. Maybe we will level you. Trump always meant business. And just because Joe Biden thinks that he had to be held to some deal doesn't mean he did. He's known all along throughout his short presidency so far that he can undo things that Donald Trump has done as president. You know, like, for example, the Iran nuclear deal. Trump said, we're out. Biden says, we want to get back in. The Paris Climate Accord, which would absolutely crush America's competitiveness on the global stage. He wants to bring us back into it and put it into force. Not to mention all the other regulations and things that Biden has been undoing, the different policies, the list goes on and on and on. He's felt no hesitation whatsoever to say, no, we are not going to change from the agreement that Donald Trump reached, or we're going to just hold to the things that Trump did. When has he ever done that? Oh, now with Afghanistan. Again, Keith Nobles, myself, we're examples of Americans who want to get out of Afghanistan. We should be getting out of Afghanistan, but it is the execution, and it has been done horribly wrong by Biden, and he's unwilling to really take responsibility. So, well, the responsibility is mine in the end. Yeah, right. It is. But guess what, Joe? It's not just your responsibility. You're culpable for what is happening. And you're not really taking responsibility because you're not admitting that you were wrong in how you did it. In trying to withdraw U.S. military forces before getting our civilians out, before getting our people out, our allies out. There's a reason why the European partners for the United States of America are pissed off when France is upset with you because they think you are cutting and running too soon. You know you're in hot water. You know that you are weak and feckless. France. Let that one sink in for a moment. That is the current state of affairs with Joe Biden. That's how he operates. That's how he thinks. To the extent he even is aware of what's going on. And that's a big question right now, and I'm not being flippant about it. We've known about Biden's issues of not being all there from the campaign, from before the campaign. Hell, going back to 2009, I think it was, when Robin Williams did a little bit about Biden not really knowing what he was saying. This was over a decade ago, when he was vice president of the United States, not even president right now. So this isn't really something entirely new, but we've seen the precipitous decline, and now it is having real world consequences. And to Sergeant First Class Lindsey Meringer's point from earlier, make no mistake, no two ways about it. The generals, the military brass failed here, because they didn't plan for these contingencies. The crisis that was coming about was something they can and should have foreseen, or at least prepared for, especially given all of the intelligence that reportedly the military and the president had received, that Kabul could fall pretty damn quickly. And they didn't heed those warnings. Lots of blame to go around back to all the administrations. But Biden is the one who made that decision to execute an operational withdrawal. And we are seeing right now what the results of that decision are. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. You've been watching a special report of Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Last week, I caught up with the former ambassador to Bahrain from 1986 to 1989, someone who has been in touch with folks in the Middle East ever since he was ambassador. In fact, George H.W. Bush brought him back in to help with the diplomatic affairs of the first Gulf War. He really knows his stuff. He has fantastic insights. I sat down with him in person last week. I want to end the live stream by sharing that interview with Ambassador Zakhem for you. And that's just going to run the course. So I'm done with the live portion. We're going to be playing this interview, but I appreciate you joining us tonight. My thanks to Sergeant First Class Lindsey Meringer, to Keith Nobles, and to you for liking, subscribing, sharing our content. Please subscribe to the podcast, Jimmy at the Crossroads podcast, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We're on TuneIn and the iHeartRadio app. We've got more new podcasts coming up very soon, including tomorrow. So much coming up on that and more. Thank you so much. And here is my interview with former ambassador to Bahrain, Sam Zakhem. Ambassador, we have chaos in the Middle East. Afghanistan, the United States pulling out troops before even getting our civilians out of there, or Afghani allies or American allies from Europe. What is your overall sense, sir, for what's been going on and how this has been handled by the Biden administration?
It's a big fiasco in American foreign policy. Donald Trump would not have carried on with his plan to withdraw the troops without successful negotiations between the Taliban and the Ghani government, or between us and the Taliban in Qatar, to make sure that our staff and our allies and those Afghanis who risked their lives to help us were safe and secure. So the failure of American foreign policy in this regard belongs to Joe Biden and Joe Biden alone and no one else.
So in terms of the situation there in Afghanistan, I mean, let's go back. It was 2001. We're coming upon the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And then less than a month later, on October 7th, 2001, the United States invaded Afghanistan. What is your vantage point on the original invasion, the decision to remain in Afghanistan as opposed to just selecting targets and having a really full-throated, full frontal assault to send a message? And then also subsequently, of course, getting into the Iraq War in 2003, which I know you are a very vocal opponent of.
Well, we had to go into Afghanistan after this horrible, terrible strike on our country by Osama bin Laden and his cohorts. I was not in support of staying there forever. We should have finished the job much earlier and gone out. But unfortunately, the people there have also failed themselves in order to make their country stable and secure.
So now, 20 years later, the Biden administration withdraws the U.S. from Afghanistan. I mean, obviously, we couldn't stay there forever. Withdrawal is something that the vast majority of Americans understood needed to happen. It seems to me it was the execution of the withdrawal from Afghanistan that was the big blunder here by Biden.
Exactly. We had so many thousands of Afghanis who were supporting us and who fought along our side against the Taliban, and we put them in danger. We have lost tremendous credibility throughout the Middle East, actually throughout the whole world. And this is really something that terrorist groups like ISIS, like Boko Haram in Nigeria, like Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and other terrible, horrible Islamist groups, they love to see us fail the way we did fail. It was a chaotic situation for America and for our allies.
And Ambassador Sam Zakhem, it remains a chaotic situation in Afghanistan. We have thousands of American diplomats there. We have hundreds of foreign press members who are just doing their job as journalists. We have our allies in Europe, the Germans and the British and others who have embassies there that have said we need to evacuate now because the United States suddenly decided to withdraw. And yet in the course of this sudden withdrawal, it seems that the American government was completely blindsided, or at least that's what we're led to believe, by this withdrawal resulting in a Taliban takeover of not just other parts of Afghanistan, but going right into the capital of Kabul in just a matter of days. I mean, the State Department ambassador last week, I think Thursday, had a press conference where they said, look, we're not going to see the Taliban take over Kabul in 3 days, and yet that's exactly what happened.
Exactly. And it was sad to watch the President of the United States wash his hands and say, that he's not guilty, that he didn't do anything wrong. The Denver Post headline, Intel warned of military collapse. He had enough warning by our intelligence agencies that the Taliban was going to take over very quickly.
We'll not conduct a hasty rush to the exit. We'll do it responsibly, deliberately, and safely. And we will do it in full coordination with our allies and partners.
Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true.
Can you please clarify what they have told you about whether that will happen or not?
That is not true. They did not reach that conclusion. The likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
And I thought, having testified at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee when Mr. Biden was a ranking member on it, I thought he should know better. And I really had confidence that he will know better, but unfortunately, he failed our country, he failed our people, and worst of all, he failed our allies.
The president of Afghanistan, Ghani, he left quickly as the United States was pulling out. One of the big consequences of the U.S. pullout was that no longer were we providing air support and intelligence to the Afghani security forces. So they see their president leave, they see the United States withdraw from providing that critical support that has been so essential for the Afghanis losing. I mean, they've lost 50 to 70,000 of their security forces in casualties, taken those casualties in fighting in Afghanistan, losing that U.S. support, losing their president. Are you surprised that they would say, their security forces, Ambassador, we need to get out of here? We need to withdraw from the fight?
Well, I honestly don't know. I don't have much confidence in the government when the leader, the president, just surrenders and leaves the country, leave his people naked practically in the face of the aggression by the Taliban and how fast they moved in. That's a big failure on the part of those whom we supported in the past. And maybe it's a lesson for us to think twice before we get involved in any conflict, especially when become so preoccupied in building nations, so to speak, nation buildings. This should be a very strong warning to future American presidents as to when they should be involved, where they should be involved, and how long we should be involved, and whether the involvement is in service of American national interest and whether it is economically feasible for us to go through with it.
Again, we're talking with former ambassador to Bahrain from 1986 to 1989, Sam Zakhem. And Ambassador, you spent much time in the Middle East, including time in the 1990s in Afghanistan. What can you tell us? I mean, obviously that was before the United States invasion, before the events of 9/11, before the incursion that we've seen over the course of the last few days in terms of the Taliban advancement. What can you tell us about the country there and the Taliban and how they operate and how we could have seen the Taliban be so successful so quickly in taking even Kabul?
Well, originally in the mid-80s, mid to late 80s, we supported the Taliban and we helped them because we felt that the Soviet presence there was against our national interest and the national interests of our allies in the region. So we got involved legitimately and properly, helping the Taliban get rid, and the government of Afghanistan get rid of Soviet occupation. But we should have seen the writing on the wall, actually, and knowing how the Taliban and how radical they are, and how they would be inviting all kinds of terrorist organizations. Now, Afghanistan is going to become a haven for terrorist organizations.
Well, and Ambassador, we've seen the United States doing the diplomatic pullout. European countries doing the same, but China and Russia, they are maintaining their diplomatic posts. The Iranians, exact same thing. What does this vacuum of the West leaving Afghanistan to those powers, what does that do to American influence in the region?
It saddens me so much, thinking of my former country, Lebanon. Iran now, and its support of international terrorism, is the one country that we should concentrate on and limit. Unfortunately, Joe Biden doesn't understand that, but Iran loves it. Iran is so happy that we turned tails and ran away. I used to say America's colors don't run, but under Biden, unfortunately, our colors, the red, white, and blue, ran away and left our allies under very heavy threat from a terrible organization, a terrible terrorist group called Taliban.
So how would you have wanted to see Biden handle this if he was doing so responsibly, knowing that we couldn't be in there longer? Like the American people, tired and wary, 20 years in, what would have been the responsible way to withdraw?
The responsible way would have been to have successful negotiations with the Taliban in Qatar, where we have representative, and they do have a mission in Qatar, or to see the Ghani government come to a successful understanding with the Taliban about transition or about the future of Afghanistan, maybe sharing of power. It's okay, but Mr. Biden just did not care at all. It's like surrendering Saigon.
Ambassador Zakhem, one thing that's so striking to me is the fact that Biden withdrew military forces. We had 2,500 troops. Now we've got about 7,000 to evacuate over 10,000 American and European personnel, well over 10,000, I think, let alone the Afghani allies that did so much with the promise of American support and protection. We're talking about interpreters. We're talking about informants. We're talking about these allies that put so much on the line to support us, who now reportedly, the Taliban are going door to door, knocking on those doors saying, where is this person? We're looking for this person. Going to the imams and saying, give me a list of the women and the girls in your locations, in your area, that we should be able to sell off into slavery or sell for or provide for prearranged marriages and so forth. I mean, how can we focus on withdrawing troops before those civilian concerns are addressed?
That's why we say it's a chaotic situation. It's a failure of American foreign policy. It's a failure of our president and the way he functioned. What are we going to tell the Japanese friends? What are we going to tell our Israeli allies? What are we going to tell the Lebanese who suffered under the threats from Hezbollah and Iran? What are we going to tell Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Bahrain that came with us with the Abrahamic yes, and had made peace with Israel? We're losing credibility so much now with allies, with friends, and our adversaries, especially the Russia and China, and the culprit, Iran, are rejoicing.
So in the Middle East, we were seeing tremendous progress. We've talked about this many a time, including here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, about the Middle East progress that had been sustained under President Trump, including the Abraham Accords, where multiple Arab countries were signing agreements with Israel, where trading relationships and tourism were being opened up in a way that had never been seen before. And that's because of American strength, as you were alluding to before. I mean, President Trump, his very first foreign speech was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and he was telling them not to tolerate terrorism, to push them back, and to not accept terrorist activity. And he had that sort of relationship that he was fostering. What does this message send, the withdrawal in this way from Afghanistan, send to those partners in the Middle East, and why is that so significant?
I wish I can find the term how bad this thing is. You know, President Trump did the impossible. Very few people, myself included, ever thought that he was going to succeed bringing all those Arab countries and Israel together. After 70 years of warfare and conflict and distrust and warring among themselves, etc., it was a great success. And compared now to what Biden is doing, I feel sorry for our country under the leadership of this man.
Now, I know you have been following the reactions in the Middle East. You have talked with folks that are in the region. What is their sense here for the lack of leadership in this regard from President Biden?
They feel that, the people I have spoken with feel that this is a shot in the arm for Iran and its lackeys, be it in Yemen or in Lebanon or in Syria.
In what way is this beneficial to Iran?
Well, it is showing that we are not a nation that could be relied on. We do not keep our word, our commitment, and our allies therefore should distrust us.
And in terms of that distrust, it seems to me that it was the manner of the withdrawal, that there wasn't an agreement on the ground that was able to be enforced, that the American people were caught flat-footed by Afghanistan, by the Taliban's onslaught. I mean, clearly, while intelligence was saying one thing, it seems like that message wasn't taken, and people were surprised in the Biden administration at the speed with which the Taliban actually did swarm through the country and managed to retake Kabul. That kind of weakness is more than just let's get out of the country, but it's we're going to get out of the country without any sort of plan, without any preparation for the Taliban onslaught, and without even addressing Western allies and our own people.
Amen. Amen. That's why I say it shows how naive President Biden is, really, when his intelligence agencies warned him months beforehand that the Taliban were going to go so quickly and take over. He said he was shocked and surprised by how fast they took over. Nobody in his position should have been so shocked after his intelligence agencies told him what they told him, and after having seen the Taliban, they are fierce fighters. And you know, they are radical Islamists. They believe in this thing blindly, and they're ready to die for it. And he should have known that and not say, oh, I'm shocked how fast they took over.
Right. What are the long-term implications now of this blunder, Ambassador Zakhem?
All I could say is it's not good for the United States' interest in a very, very crucial region of the world. Almost 2/3 to 3/4 of the world oil comes from that little region of the world, from the Middle East. We lost credibility big time throughout. I wonder if Mohammed bin Zayed or Mohammed bin Salman now would trust even 10% of what they used to trust Trump, whether they trust Biden 10% of the trust that they had in the man. You know, because in that region of the world, Jimmy, and I know you know it yourself, but if you have the power and fail to use it, they'll call you a paper tiger and they'll kick you all the way to Timbuktu. We're going to have problems.
Well, and I was just going to ask you about the role of strength in that region and the Arab world and how important that is, especially given, like, for example, the peace with Israel. That was something that could only be brought about even with recognizing Jerusalem as the capital. The Abraham Accords still happened because it seems there was that show of strength that they could count on from the Trump administration.
Exactly, exactly. And if there is one thing they fear in the Middle East, especially Islamic terrorists or extremists. You know, there are many good Muslims in the world, but unfortunately, most of the terrorism around the world today belongs to them. And they understand one thing, they fear that one thing, and they respect that one thing, and it's force, power. And if you have the power, as we said earlier, and fail to use it, they not only do they call you a paper tiger, but they will really kick you all the way as far as they can.
Well, and the Chinese have already put, using through their press outlets, like the Global Times, have already said, Hong Kong, Taiwan, you can't count on the United States.
Exactly. I'm sorry I didn't mention Hong Kong and Taiwan. I mentioned Japan and Israel and Lebanon, but yes, in Hong Kong, isn't it heartwarming to see the people in Hong Kong carrying American flags? Do you think they dare carry them anymore? And when Biden is president, after his big failure here, you know, it is Saigon revisited. I think that we're becoming the laughing stock of the world.
We're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the horrifying September 11th terrorist attacks. I was 11 years old when 9/11 happened, and we've spent so much blood, sweat, and tears in the Middle East. There are Americans who are saying, look, we're out. We're out of Afghanistan. We need to get out of Afghanistan, just as we needed to get out of Iraq. We've been at war for my entire cognizant life, Ambassador, of what the world around me. We have been at war in Afghanistan. So looking back at that 20-year period, what lessons do you think we need to take away for American foreign policy writ large? And what do you tell the American people who are like, you know what, we just need to get out of there, regardless of how we do it, we just need to get out of there?
Well, maybe you should talk to a Vietnam vet. We, with all the lives of brave young men and women who went willingly and fought bravely, what are we going to tell them now that we betrayed those who died, those great Americans who lost their lives over there? To have ended it in such a chaotic fiasco way, it is betraying. It's betraying those wonderful ones who fought bravely and who died for America.
And now looking back at American foreign policy from the last 20 years, what lessons should we take away? I mean, we've spent over $1 trillion in Afghanistan. We've had our troop presence there for so long. Many suggest, you said we should have gotten out much earlier on in the process. What lessons are we to take away from both our incursions in the Middle East and also in terms of our withdrawal from the Middle East in this way?
I would say we should think twice before getting involved. Like, we got involved in Korea, but look, we built a great nation in Korea. Some nations may not deserve or may not really be candidates to be free because they don't have this mission in life, or they're not achievement oriented. Look, we rebuilt Germany in the Marshall Plan after the war, and look where they are. If you go to South Korea, you wouldn't believe. You think you're in the United States. Beautiful people, beautiful street, beautiful building, great government, etc. South Korea. We should think very much before we get involved in such places in the Middle East.
And how we do it. If we feel we need to retaliate, for example, like September 11th, how do we do it? How do we go about that versus let's try to engage in nation building?
Well, nation building needs achievement-oriented people, a strong middle class, democratic form of government, respect for the individual entity, rather than be blindly focused on religion. And some countries don't deserve to be free by us. I mean, we should not be involved in so many places.
Ambassador Zakhem, as we wrap up here in your wonderful home, and I appreciate your time today, if you were in the White House, if President Biden welcomed you in and said, Ambassador, I screwed up, what should I do now? What would you advise him?
I think he should face the American people and tell them, I am sorry, I withdrew our troops without knowing, without thinking about the horror that was awaiting them when the Taliban took over. I'm sorry for my decision. I apologize about it. And hopefully I would learn a lesson from the mistakes that I have committed in this very important situation.
What value would there be in that kind of mea culpa? Why should he do that?
I think to level up with the American people, to be honest with the American people, he should confess that he made a horrible, terrible mistake that is going to affect America's reputation and interest throughout the world, especially in areas like the Middle East.
And then from a policy standpoint, what should he do now? What would you advise him to do vis-a-vis Afghanistan and vis-a-vis the Arab world and Israel to rebuild that confidence that he has lost?
I think it's hard to trust the Taliban, a terrorist organization, but I think Mr. Biden should go as far as he can to talk with representatives of the Taliban, be it in Qatar or through Khalil Zad, our representative at the United Nations, who is Afghani himself, to make sure that women are not going to be, something that they trash around and kill. And
they've made so many gains, women have, in terms of being able to have education, to not simply be forced into slavery or to be forced to cover their faces. And
exactly. We should try to protect women, and we should try to make sure that they respect international law, and maybe we can even help them economically or logistically to have a acceptable, decent government with a decent country.
But how can they do that without American troops now going back in and taking some sort of, what kind of pressure can actually be put onto the Taliban, or do we need to bribe them? I mean, honestly, so much corruption. You can bet your bottom dollar that the Chinese are paying a lot of money, a pretty penny, for the Taliban, or will be doing that, I think, for the Taliban to abide by their wishes, especially since there's a small part of Afghanistan that is on the border with China.
Yeah, Well, Pakistan is suffering big time because of the influx of Afghans into Pakistan. We should take that into consideration too. But frankly, I would repeat, we should think long and seriously before getting involved in any country in that part of the world.
And if we do, and we're getting out of that country, we need to do so responsibly.
Hear, hear.
Ambassador Sam Zakhem, you've been generous with your time, sir. Thank you so much for joining us again here on Jimmy at the Crossroads and doing so in person here at your lovely home.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure, as always, to be with you.
Once again, former ambassador to Bahrain from 1986 to 1989, Sam Zakhem joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I think we need to heed his words of wisdom, and the Biden administration and future administrations must do so, to be sure. Biden's blunder in Afghanistan is an atrocious error of judgment, one that we will be enduring for many, many years to come here in the United States, but especially in the Middle East. And imagine what the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians will do with this vacuum. He needs to be responsible moving forward. We need to provide protection for our American civilians, for our allies, and for the Afghanis that have done so much for this country. And then, in the future, as he said at the end of our conversation, we need to make sure that the United States acts responsibly in any sort of incursion in the Middle East, if we are going to do that, or any other country. And we need to do so with the appropriate planning and intelligence and more. This is a disaster that did not need to happen. Alas, here we are. Now Biden needs to step up and be responsible moving forward.